Good morning, seventh grade. Welcome to, I think I just checked it as lesson 23, where we are going to continue chapter 12. I'm not sure if we'll finish it today or not. I noticed there's quite a few questions left. So let's take a look at the questions where we left off yesterday. Here they are. Okay, so yesterday we did answer questions 1 through 4, and we left off right at the end of Ross Milton sharing his ideas about the 13th Amendment and what he felt how difficult that was going to be once the slaves are freed and the war is over. And that's where we'll pick up. Jethro will be thinking about that quite a bit, remembering some things from earlier in the book. So we're going to start with question 5. What happened in the second week of April? 6, what bad news did Nancy bring to Jethro? 7, how did Jethro feel about Lincoln's death? 8, who was the gaunt soldier who found Jethro in the field? And 9, what was Shad's plan for Jethro? So we'll take a look at those again as we move along with the chapter. So we left off yesterday on page 181. It is currently April of 1865, or it will be on this particular page. So we have now crossed our 5th April. Okay, so we are at the first full paragraph is where we left off. Jethro tramped the frozen fields and thought of the things Ross Milton had said. He remembered the supper table that night in mid-April of 1861 and Will Scram's angry voice exclaiming, "Would your abolitionists get the crocodile tears sloshed out of their eyes so they could take the black man by the hand? Would they say, 'We want you to come to our schools'? I'm sorry, 'We want you to come to our churches and your children to come to our schools'? Why, we danged near forget the difference in the colors of our skins because we are so almighty full of brotherly love. Would it be like that in your northern cities, Cousin John?" So Cousin Willis was foreseeing that possibility, and Ross Milton, although he doesn't agree with slavery, sees that that will be a problem as well. The waiting for word of peace went on. February passed, the bitterest cold of the year coming as usual in that month. Then March came, breaking the back of winter with warmth permeating the cold, and with the smell of spring drifting daily to tease hope and give shy promise to a coming radiance. One second. Sorry about that. Okay, so then finally the 5th April of the war arrived. And in southern Illinois, it came in a burst of warmth and color that seemed prophetic to those who waited for word from Washington. That 5th April had moved only into its second week when the news came that the guns were silent, that the terms of peace had been signed by 2 tired men somewhere in Virginia at a place called Appomattox Courthouse. Jethro rode into Newton with Ed Turner and was allowed to spend the night with Ross Milton. By the time he reached the little county seat, the bunting was spread out by the yard. Remember that vocabulary word? The patriotic material, like a flag. Flags flew from almost every house. A long, unused cannon boomed from the cliffs above the river. They had lifted the trapdoor in the roof of the jail, allowing the half-dozen delinquent citizens of the county to climb outside so their voices might add to the clamor. Men danced in the streets and embraced one another. Some drank a continuous string of toasts to Lincoln, Grant, and a dozen others, until their bottles were empty and the compliments had to be started all over again with new purchases at one of the saloons. Others wept while they shouted. There was hardly a home in the county that had not felt the fiery lash of the war's tongue, meaning that everybody has felt the effects of the war in some way on their family. The editor took Jethro to the restaurant for supper. This time, the place was milling with people who had come into town to celebrate. Plump Mrs. Hiles was bustling about in a near frenzy, but she took time to speak to Jethro and to lament his golden curls, which had straightened out into a slightly waving thatch of light brown hair combed neatly back of the ears. "You ain't as purty as you was 3 years ago, young Crichton," she said brightly. "You're getting a little of the owl look of your friend Red Milton here." She clapped him on the back briefly and went on to her duties, knowing very well she had said a thing that pleased Matt Crichton's youngest boy. That night, there was a great display of fireworks, and then the town's band played while nearly 1,000 voices joined in singing the battle hymn of the Republic. Jethro's heart swelled in his breast. He thought suddenly of the tired face of the president. "How I'd like to shake hands with him tonight," he thought. He turned to look at Ross Milton, who stood beside him, balanced painfully upon his crutches. The editor's eyes were fixed on something far away above the heads of the crowd, and Jethro noticed that tears were running down his cheeks. At home the next day, he tried to describe the details of the celebration to his parents and to Nancy, who listened with eyes as radiant as Jenny's used to be when she received her first letters from Shadrach. The little boys had caught some of their mother's happiness. "Do you remember him, Jeth?" they asked, with some awe of Jethro's 13 years. "Do you remember what our pa looks like?" Daily, the color of April grew brighter. The apple and peach orchards were in bloom again, and the redbud was almost ready to burst. The little leaves on the silver poplars quivered in green and silver lights with every passing breeze, and Jenny's favorite lilacs bloomed in great thick clusters, deep purple and as fragrant as any beautiful thing on earth. Then suddenly, because there were no longer any eyes to perceive it, the color was gone, and the 5th April had become like her 4 older sisters, the time of grief and desolation. People would ask for many years, "Where were you when you heard? What were you doing? Who brought you the word?" Jethro would remember a sunlit field and a sense of serenity and happiness, such as he had not known since early childhood. He would remember that he had stopped his team when he saw Nancy running toward him, that Nancy's face had been as white as it was during the days of waiting for a letter about the Battle of Chickamauga, that she had sobbed against his shoulder. He thought at first that something had happened to his father, or that word had come of John's being one of those last soldiers to die when peace was almost within reach. Then Nancy said, "Jeth, it's the president. They've killed the president." So I want to pause for just a second. What happened the second week of April? I'm not sure that it was the president dying. We have 2 main things that have happened very, very closely together. First, we get the news of peace, that they have signed the terms of peace. So on page 181, it does say that it was in the second week, that April had moved only into its second week when the news came that the guns were silent. So that really is the answer to that one before. But I do want to point out it was not long after. We barely, to be honest, I don't even think all of those men who were fighting knew that the war had ended when the president was shot, simply because word moved so slowly. It does not mention which week that is, though, but it is important to know that those 2 events occurred very closely together. So that's the answer to number 6. What bad news did Nancy bring to Jethro? And I'm assuming most of you know much of the story about how Lincoln had gone out to Ford Theater with his wife, and it was one of the first times they'd gone out in a long time after their son had died, and that John Wilkes Booth burst in and shot him and jumped from the balcony. And initially people thought maybe it was part of the show. And so anyway, he was assassinated. We are going to end lesson 23 here right at this break. And because it's a shorter lesson today, it's only a little over 10 minutes. I would ask that you make sure that you have your answers finished up and that you could spend some time working on Spelling City for the last vocabulary list, which you can wrap up at the end of this week as well. Have a great day.